um, members of city parliament attending this session. We're very happy about that. But the most warm welcome to Jan Gehl. We're very glad to have you here. It's really a great thing that you took the job to come over to Marburg. A few years ago, I was mayor for some time already. I got a present for Christmas from my wife. It was Cities for People, Städte für Menschen from Jan Gehl. And she handed it over with a simple sentence, "This is how you're supposed to do it." I read the book. I always think reading a book is helping a lot, but it's not the whole thing. And so I decided that we would be very glad to invite Jan Gehl to come to Marburg and give us a chance for personal discussions, have him have an impression of Marburg and learn a lot more than you can learn by a book. And what would be more adequate for a session like this than our preparation mood for the big Marburg 800 anniversary next year, consisting of three main topics. Remembering Marburg, having a big event next year, and looking forward to future Marburg, Marburg erinnern, Marburg erleben, Marburg erfinden. And in this idea, preparing for discussing the future of town next year, we arranged for a series of talks under the topic Marburg, weiter, denken. Yes, the association is somewhat difficult, but we were first. Thinking ahead Marburg 800, having concerning with the ideas of how to shape our town in the future, what developments we all want for our city, how we should improve our city, and how much future can and must we risk today. Transformation processes in cities take place all over the world. And Jan Gehl, having been a researcher at and a professor at the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts, having been for 60 years now someone looking at the human view of architecture, someone inventing the human scale as a measure for cities, having published several books in his part-time, especially Städte für Menschen, and collaborated with a lot of major cities around the world, from Adelaide to Melbourne to Rotterdam, Stockholm, Oslo, Copenhagen. He's the guy who changed Copenhagen, you know. Edinburgh, London, Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, Amman, Seattle, New York City, Moscow, Shanghai, and now Marburg. I will not hold on all the honors and special awards Jan Gehl has been awarded, because then the evening will be over and you're not here to hear a list of awards, but listen to Jan Gehl. He arrived yesterday, and we already had a trip yesterday through town and showed him our city. This morning, some discussions with students from faculties throughout Hessen on topics of city development. And tonight, we're here. Jan Gehl's main topic, and he will explain to you tonight, is that you have to look at architecture not from the model view, standing far away, looking down on something that may look quite aesthetic, but apparently free of humans. But quite on the contrast, making cities for people means looking at the human scale. And if you listen to Jan Gehl, and if you read his books, you will find the moment you read it, yes, he must be right. And if we look at our own experience in our town, which are the places where we feel well in public space, which are the areas that give us a nice, comfortable, a warm feeling, which are the areas where you think, oh, let's get away of this quite fast areas that give you a feeling of Unbehagen, the beauty of our town, the quality of our town, and the areas we don't like. And you will find, Jan Gehl will explain to you tonight why this is just the way it is, also in Marburg. I always thought that this totally artificial town, Brasilia, where nature tries to take it back as it always overgrows the roads leading there, and where you have the highest concentration of psychotherapy in the world, in a totally artificial town. It's something that tells you there is a human scale and there's an artificial scale, and apparently we should concentrate on the human scale. Yes, there's always a risk if you listen to a famous and important expert. You might just explain everything you do with his arguments and try to break them down on what you might have in mind already. I will withhold from that Versuchung. Kann mir jemand helfen? Okay.
Temptation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I will withhold from this temptation because tonight we're here to listen to Jan Gehl and find out more about the human scale. However, the human scale, the measurement that makes cities places for people, places where people feel well, this must be the scale for everything we develop in our town in the future. So thank you very much that you're here. We're very fond of, we're very nosy and curious about learning according to your ideas for the standards of future development of Marburg. Welcome, Jan Gehl.
Thank you for the very kind welcome. I have some good news for all of you. The English I can speak is probably something you can understand. I can only speak English quite slowly, and I only know about 300 words in English. And I think that most of you can get it at that level. We'll see what we can do. We shall have the first slide, which is the second slide. Here is the first one. I'm going to speak tonight about good cities for the 21st century. And I do think that at this time in history, we are very obsessed and interested in having livable cities. And as you can see on the pictures here, to me, livable cities is something which is good for people, where people can have a joyful life and that the city is inviting people for various activities which they would like to do in a good city. So life in the city is very important for having a good quality of city, 21st century. And my message is really put people first in city planning. It is about high time that we do that, because we've had a problem for the past 50 years. When we look closer at the situation, we've done everything we could do to make the cities unpleasant for people in various ways. We've had in the past 50 years, two very dominating planning paradigms, and that was modernism and the car invasion. They came at the same time, and they completely changed the cities and city planning as we knew it. And it really got bad from 1960, but some of these are actually older phenomena. Of course, the idea of mobility, that every man should have a ton of steel and 4 rubber wheels, that is a splendid idea from 120 years ago in Detroit, actually Mannheim, but Detroit, the Wild West. It was a good idea for mobility to have a ton of steel and 4 rubber wheels, but is this still a good idea in our densely populated cities? Question mark. We had the car invasion. It's had a very strong influence on our quality of life. And of course, the modernism, And the modernism has been very important for our way of thinking about cities. Before the modernism, we had the good old days, and all cities in all parts of the world, they look the same. If you are in Japan or in China or in Italy or in Sweden, they would look absolutely the same because they were built for Homo sapiens, they were built for the walking animal, they were built for the kind of senses we have developed in our biological history. They were made by people for people, and they all looked the same because they were built in eye level, and they are still very pleasant, these places. We go to them when we have holidays, whatever. But then came the modernism. Modernism actually started in the 20s, and it really took on more in the 30s with the Athens Charter of 1933, where all the planners of Europe met at a cruise ship in Athens and wrote the Charter of Athens about new city planning. From now on, all the city is a machine. It should be very efficient. And also they did some very important thing. They said everything old cannot be used anymore because we now have a new species. We have modern man. They didn't talk about modern woman, but they talk about modern man. And actually I showed this slide at a lecture in Lübeck, and somebody said, isn't that Goebbels actually running there? But I hope it's not. Actually, it's from 1932, and that was before his time. Anyway, they had this concept that the city should be very rational, and the major purpose of the city was to have a very efficiently machine for living, and you should run from your house to your workplace and back again and be healthy, whatever. There was also a strong element of anti-tuberculosis in this, that we have to spread people out, and they actually had this idea that there's long passages in the scriptures of the modernism about how bad streets and squares are. Streets especially, they're street girls and street boys and parliament of the street, and there are barricades across the street. Everything bad about streets. Don't make streets no more. It's very important to realize that before modernism, all the cities were made up of spaces. They were made up of streets and squares. In these spaces, the whole life of the city took place. People met there. People moved from one end of the city to the other through the spaces. All the buildings of the city were related to the spaces, and in the spaces also there were processions. They crowned the kings and cut the head off of criminals. Everything happened in spaces, and that was a fantastic change to modernism, because suddenly the focus was moved from the spaces for people to the objects, to the buildings. And inside the buildings, this efficiency, this machine was going on. And this is actually a plan made by Corbusier for how you could save Paris. To have a really good city in Paris, you should take the whole thing down. It was redundant, and built 24 high-rise buildings where all the Parisians could sit up there and see their wonderful city outside. So the focus moved from the spaces of people to the objects. And what was not built upon was leftover space. And there's nothing more boring than leftover space, actually. If we look closer at cities, and you can actually look here in Marburg at the old city and some of the new city districts to see this enormous change in the way cities were built. In the old cities, we can remember all the streets and all the squares. We can mention all the names of the squares and streets, but only a few buildings. We'll say, oh, there's the Rathaus, and there's the cathedral, and there may be one or more other buildings we can remember, but all the rest we remember from the old cities are the spaces, because the buildings were made by spaces. in the modern cities, we can remember no spaces because there are no spaces. Can you remember any spaces from Dubai? That's a good reason for that. But what we remember in the new space, in the new cities, are all the funny buildings which architects have made. Because this shift from spaces to objects was a great improvement for the architects, because suddenly he was important. He should not only make cathedral now and then, he should make everything. And the more funny he could make it, the better chance of going into the magazines and being a star architect. That's very important, to be a star architect. And here you have a collection of star architecture. And the interesting thing about this is its only form. The content of all these buildings are probably the same, but everyone is trying to find a new interesting form. I would think this looks like the perfume bottles in my wife's shelf in the bathroom, that all the perfume fab factories make funny bottles to draw the attention, but there's the same content actually. Form must follow fashion. And also now we have what I call the bird shit architects, who fly all over the world and drop high-rise and other buildings wherever you can order architecture on the internet. It's not a matter of context anymore. It's just a matter of funny forms. That is a very critical approach to the present-day architecture, of which many architects are completely different from these and do what great things. But this is what we see, this fantastic difference: cities of spaces, cities of objects. But the result of this change was a goodbye to the concern for people and a goodbye to the concern for the social life of the city. All the things which went on in the spaces in the city can no more go on in these leftover spaces. It was also a goodbye to human scale, because in the old days, everything was made to human scale. Go into Marburg here and see wonderful examples of the city built at eye level and with wonderful human scale. And then in the new towns, you can see this, where you're moving about in this leftover space and you're floating in free air, and you don't feel comfortable at all in these limitless spaces. Too much space, too few people, too little connection to the built environment. This was a very short description of this fantastic manipulation with the way people were settled, which happened in the last 50 years. And it's interesting that at no time people really liked this transition. We have endless, especially cartoons, about how this city transformation has been received by ordinary people. We lost the spaces, we lost public life. In the same period, we had the car invasion, and it started slowly, but again from 1960 it really took on, and the people who were not chased out by modernism were chased out by the motor invasion, and they were squeezed over to the sidewalks and whatever, and the places became unpleasant and not very nice. The car invasion had a number of phases. Here is the first phase, that's from Copenhagen, where you can see 1905, people are walking freely all over this square. The city belongs to people. There's one car, no problem, and there's one streetcar, that was no problem either. People were in command of the situation. Only 30 years later, I found this postcard. The cars are coming, and everybody is running as fast as they could. And here is the situation. These are Danish pictures from Copenhagen, that in the 60s, cars start to take over the whole world. And the car drivers' organization, they yell with pride, "We have reached 1 million." That's a matter of quantity. And the whole city, where all these spaces were made for people, had at this point been taken over by cars. And we can look around the world and see that people from that time on are generally treated very badly in cities all over the world. This is Bucharest in Romania. They have a little problem here, but they have more problems in the developing countries. We really have had a period where everything has been done to make the cars happy. And of course, when the modernists left much leftover space, that was really gefundenes Fressen for the car invasion, because they could really use that space for parking and for driving. So we had a completely new world in the last 50 years. Also with the car came a further confusion about scale, because in the old days we had the 5 km/h scale in our cities. You can go in Marburg, central Marburg, and see exactly that it's the 5 km/h scale. It's made for Homo sapiens and the speed with which we walk. The spaces can be small, because if you're moving slowly, you can maneuver and you can easily get around in small spaces. The signs are small, because you can easily see small signs when you are walking slowly. And you can see people, and you can, furthermore, you have the best of two worlds. You have the buildings close by and all the information about buildings and people. And then in the distance, you have the mountains and the cathedral. So you can have the best of two worlds. All this was completely changed with the arrival of the car. Then we have the 60 km/h scale all over in the car, the areas which were made after the arrival of the motor car. And with 60 km/h architecture, you need big spaces where you cannot maneuver at that speed. You need enormous signs, or you cannot see them while you move by. The buildings have no details because you can't see them anyway. And there are no people. Even if there are people, you cannot see them if you move by 60 km/h. So it was a second goodbye to human scale. And if I look at my profession of architects and planners today, there is a great insecurity about scale. I think that architects and planners cannot really handle scale. They're confused about the slow scale and the fast scale and the human scale and the other scale. And it's very difficult to understand really human scale, but we have to understand it to make some places which are pleasant for people. So these two enormous earthquakes in city planning has happened in the last 50 years, especially after 1960. And then we can ask, if we go back to 1960, what was known about quality for people in city planning at that time? And the answer is that we knew virtually absolutely nothing. It was generally believed that what we built had no influence on the quality of life for people. People would adapt. But then we started to see a counter movement. And the first strong voice in this counter movement was from America, was Jane Jacobs, who was sitting, he was an architectural journalist. She was sitting in Greenwich Village, and there was this plan to do with Manhattan, as they have suggested for Paris, take away the whole of the building, all the buildings in Manhattan, and build some good freeways across Manhattan, and then put high-rise along the freeways, and everybody would be happy in Manhattan. Unfortunately, Jane Jacobs lived in Greenwich Village. That was the first to go, because that was really redundant. Greenwich Village, couldn't be used for nothing. Also Chinatown and Little Italy and Tribeca and all the nice areas in Manhattan, actually, they were slated to go to give room for the Trans-Manhattan Freeway. But that was a bad luck that she was living in Greenwich Village. She raised a lot of opposition. She gathered all the inhabitants, the citizens in this area, especially Greenwich Village, and they managed to fight the city planners of New York, and they won actually this fight. and the Trans-Manhattan freeways never happened, and the erasing of these wonderful districts, which are the best in New York today, they were saved for the future. She wrote a very famous book. That was the first time somebody went up against the modernists and say, these people have not the slightest understanding of life and of people. And she said, if motorists and modernists are to plan the future, all the cities will be dead, and it will be goodbye to great cities. She also said, you planners and architects, instead of sitting in your studios imagining what it could be, look out of the window to have a little bit of understanding about how people use the cities we have. Look out of the windows. The story of my life, in a very short version. I studied architecture in the 50s, and the big thing in the 50s was the modernism. And actually, I spent 5 years in School of Architecture hanging over models and putting the objects. We always have to be up, which was equivalent to 5 kilometers up in the air, so you really could see the pattern. And then, when you had a nice pattern, it would be a nice city. And that was the city of objects, and the art of city planning was organizing the objects in an interesting way. You can go out to the university on the mountain to see this kind of architecture, this kind of planning being exercised also here. I learned that. I was very good at that in School of Architecture. I graduated in 1960. I rushed out to do all these wonderful things for mankind. Then I married a psychologist. And then there was a time when we started to do Plattenbau, and we saw the cars moving in, and we saw the suburbs completely changing, a completely new world developing. And all the time in our house, the young architects and the young psychologists, they met, and we had a bad time, us architects, because the psychologists kept saying, why are you architects not interested in people? Why do they not teach you anything about people in School of Architecture? Why do they tell you that aesthetics is everything, but it's only a little part of the whole thing? Why do you think your professors go out at 4 o'clock in the morning to photograph the monuments to be sure there are no people in front of the buildings which can distract students at the lectures? Have you thought about that? We had not thought about it. So in my case, I had to go back to School of Architecture for 40 more years. And I went back, of course, to hear what they forgot to tell me when I was there first time. But just to find out that they knew nothing. The architecture and planning was a technocratic silo, and the social sciences was another silo. We were all in silos, and both my wife and I, we decided to try to work in the borderland between architecture and planning and psychology and sociology. She worked in the Building Research Institute with housing. I worked with public spaces, with city fabric in the School of Architecture. And how did I work? I was sitting there on my behind for 40 years and watching how people use the places. And there was a lot to be learned just to see where would people love to go, where would they not go at all, and where would they stand in the places, where would they sit. And there were so many things which we could learn just by watching what the people told you right away. That was my major method of research. I systematized it, and I put all these observations together in a small little book called Leben zwischen Häusern, which came out in 1971. That is exactly 50 years from now. And already 41 years after it came out, it was translated into German, and I was very happy about that. And even the publisher said there's no interest for life between buildings in Germany. So I'm very worried about the market for a book like this one. And then it was a bestseller after a short while. This little book, which was actually my PhD thesis, saying that what is happening between the buildings is very important for the quality of a city, and the way you put the buildings and you put the entrances, everything is very important for the life between the buildings, which is an important aspect of city and city planning. After a while, I saw this book being picked up in one language after the other, and much to my joy, it was also picked up in quite a few development countries, because I really think this humanistic, putting people first in city planning, is something which is very important, especially when there is a developing situation with a not too good economy, because doing good for people is very cheap comparing doing good for cars or for streetcars or for trains or for all kinds of more advanced modes of transportation. Then, after a while, I studied for many years, and at some point, there were so many mayors who came up to me and said, "You can criticize what we are doing. Couldn't you come and tell us what we should do?" And then I had to form a company and formalize my advice. I was 63 when we started the company, and it's now, I think they have 85 people now. I'm not there anymore. But there was an enormous interest in this humanizing the city issue. And then I thought, at the end, while I was in university, we had this fantastic Danish Foundation for the Built Environment. And they were established 2000. They come running over to the School of Architecture and ask me, we think that the research you are doing is quite important for mankind. Do you have enough money? You should never ask that question to a man from a university. First I said, no, we are getting along, but couldn't you need more visiting professors and more study tours and some PhD students and some assistants? And then they were very generous, and we had very soon we had a research center for public spaces. Then I left the university. I was too old. I was 70. I was thrown out. And then I went over to my firm, and we continued. Then this foundation came back after a number of years and say, "Jan, we would like you to sit down and put down everything you know after 40 years of research, while you can still remember it." And I said, "I'm very busy." But they said, isn't it a matter of how many editors and layout people and translators and assistants? And suddenly I had time, and we produced Stelle der Menschen, and the German publisher picked it up exactly right away. So no more waiting time for 40 years. Now we have it also in German and in all the major languages like Arab and Farsi, and they even have it in Greece, though I said they should use their money for other things in Greece. Then they said it's not a problem with the economy because the Danish embassy is paying for it. So fine, they have it in Greece. That's fine, and even in French, it's come out. And I'm very proud after 50 years of writing that I have a book in French come out. And that's of course not in Paris, but in Montreal. But they are exporting it to Paris now. And in my latest book, the mayor of Paris has written a foreword for a book from Montreal. The world is small nowadays. But this particular book, in just 10 years, it's come out all over the world. And that is, to me, a sign that there is a great hunger for information about how you could care better for people, how we can care in another way than the modernistic, technocratic approach and the motorist approach, that this actually, it's very much returning to the good old days where the cities were made in eye level and made from the bottom up and not from the top down. That is really what we have learned in this, and we have made in a book like this one, and that's why that it has been spread so widely in such a short time. If we look back now on these 50 years of research, starting with Jane Jacobs in 61, I would say that there has been done enough research now in how the built environment influences people's life that we can say, if you want to find people for cities, cities for people, then we can do it now. We know enough. But the problem is really to convince the automobile industry and some other parties about that this could be another way of building cities, which is much more based on experience of mankind than on fancy ideas from the 1930s. What we have learned now is that we form the cities, but then they have a fantastic influence on the quality of life, on the kind of life we can live. And that is a number of things which has to do with city planning, that it's very difficult to have an interesting life going on in a modernistic Plattenbau area. Just to mention that there's far too much indifferent leftover space and too far between the buildings and no spaces where you can meet whatever. We also know that the details of buildings is very important. So all the way right down to the details, there's a lot of things you can do or not do. If you make a sleek facade, it has a strong psychological message. We don't want you here. Go on, go home and watch video. We don't want you here. But you can also have a city which is welcoming all in the details, that it almost say to you, you're welcome, stay around for a while, enjoy, whatever. We also know that you can make squares where absolutely no one wants to be or go to at all. And you can make squares where people run out of them as fast as they can. And you can, with the same money, make a square where people come from all over the city to be just there. You can do that. We have a square here from Copenhagen, unfortunately, where people run. It takes 42 seconds to run from the metro station to the shopping mall, and that is the time you spend there. And the other square is from Norway, have the same number of people visiting, but they have at all times 10 times more life in that square, because people enjoy to be there. When they come there, they get tempted to sit down and spend a while looking at the people and the action, whatever. So we have an enormous influence on what is going on in our built environment if we know what to do. While all this research was going on, there has been a number of changes in the program for cities, and by now we have a number of new players and new demands to the city. And actually every mayor I know everywhere, he will say, this is exactly my program. If I say what today we need, we want a livable, lively city, we want a green, sustainable city, we want a city inviting for healthy lifestyle, and we want a city which is good to be old in, every mayor I know will say, that's my program. That's exactly what we are doing here. And of course, our mayor here is, yes, indeed. And I'll just tell you about this. This about the human dimension, this shared space, the public spaces, the meeting, the casual meeting, the informal meeting of the citizens in their spaces is as old as mankind. We always loved, man is a social animal, and throughout history of man, other people have been the major attraction. It's much more attractive than flowers and plants and views to the mountain and fountains, anything, architecture, you name it. The more we are more interested in people than anything else. We have a quote from an Icelandic saga, 800 years old, where a man will say, man is man's greatest joy. And we can go to any place and see that we seek out places where other people are, because people in itself is a source of interest. We saw during the COVID times how much we missed the opportunity to use our public spaces, and how eagerly we have reconquered the spaces now. It's like cows in the spring which are let out of the stable. We've jumped into the city and started to do cafes and all the nice things of city life again with great joy. If you are still not convinced that life in a city is very important, just look at the way architects make their perspectives. Every time an architect hands in a project, it's crawling with life to show it's a good project. If there was no people on the plans here on the project, then everybody will say, what's wrong here? Where are the people? So to make sure architects overflow the drawings with people doing things they will not normally do in life, like playing a trumpet out there and whatever. But life is so important, and people in our life is a very important factor. We can see it here. Another thing which has become more and more important is, of course, to make much more sustainable city planning than we have. And with sustainable and green, I think this may be the ultimate, the best way of doing it. We can now drive our Kinder zum Klimademo in our shared electric car. That is really the ultimate in green city, or is it really? I would say that we can take it on in another way. That is that the more we can walk, the more we can use bicycles, the more we use public transportation. This could really be an efficient way to make a greener city. And that is very much on the agenda in cities around the world by now. We have another challenge now, because we realized that we have made city planning for that people were invited to sit as much as possible. For 50 years, we made city planning where people could sit in the morning, sit during the day, sit in the office, sit again, and go home and sit and watch television. So we really have had 50 years of inviting people for sitting. The doctors now call it the sitting syndrome. And my daughter, who is a medical professor, she is after me all the time and say, make sure to make your cities walkable and invite people to. And it's not enough to have an escalator up to the fitness center. You have, what they really recommend is that we make cities which naturally invite people to move more naturally by their own methods. So the World Health Organization is saying, introduce transport policies that promote active and safe methods of traveling, such as walking and bicycling. And then we have another new issue, that is, we have an increasing number of elderly people in our society, about 20 to 25 in Japan, up to 30% of the population is elderly people who have 15 or 20 years of life expectancy in front of you when they get retired. And we have to plan the cities so they're wonderful to be old in, but they shall also be wonderful to be young in, and actually they should be great for all generations. I know that in my advanced age, my doctor would say, try to do 10,000 steps every day to keep the doctor away. And think about where people will do these 10,000 steps. It's actually quite a bit of distance. And many places it's not worth moving 1 meter. So that's a new challenge. In the old days, there were no old people to speak of. Now there is a very great community of elderly people. So my point here is that if we look after people in city planning, we will address efficiently these 4 issues. You will have a more lively, livable city. You will have a more sustainable city. You will have a more city inviting for healthy lifestyles. and you will have a city to be good to be old in, but also a good city for all the other age groups. So it's going after a people-oriented city planning policy is a very good idea in this time in history. And then we can ask ourselves, are there cities who actually do something in these areas, who invite people to walk and to bicycle as much as possible, not only in the weekends, but more importantly, during the week. So we call it Sunday biking and Monday biking. Monday biking is every day. Sunday is something recreational in the weekends. There are cities, and there are more and more cities who actually engage in this kind of policies. And now I shall take you for the next 4 hours through a few of these cities. Maybe we can do it shorter. Of course, I could tell a lot about Copenhagen, but I'll wait with Copenhagen. But Copenhagen was one of the first really to take this on, and they've been at it now for almost 60 years, and they've come quite a distance in this policy. But there are cities all over the world, and through our firm and my travels, I've seen and worked with many of these cities, and it's amazing to see how much has been accomplished. I could tell you a lot about Melbourne, but we have no time. But Melbourne in 1985 was famous for being completely empty, useless, and nobody would want to go there and live there. And then they decided to reinvigorate Melbourne. It was a modernistic, car-oriented city, and they completely attacked this notion, said, in Melbourne we walk, and they made wide sidewalks, they put granite all over the city, and they put trees for shade and fantastic street furniture. They called Melbourne the donut, something with nothing in the middle. But now it's completely changed, and I would say that Melbourne now is a fantastic city, and it's almost like Paris, but the weather is much better. So if you don't know what to do, move to Melbourne, because that is by far the best city in the Southern Hemisphere, and that is done by a concerted effort. And the key figure here was the city architect, who is a brilliant guy, who would say, I've had 16 mayors, I've handled them all. And he's gone for this people-oriented policy with trams and wide sidewalks and trees or whatever in all these days. And he has something here, they call it Copenhagen style, bicycle lanes down there. And what is Copenhagen style? That is that the parked cars protect the bicycles. That is the opposite of many places where they have the bicyclists to protect the parked cars. So that's what they do in Melbourne. That is Copenhagen-style bicycle lanes. And just when we are down there, I work quite a bit in Sydney. Sydney is very famous for its waterfront, but the city center of Sydney is quite awful, and it's been completely given over to motor cars and pollution and whatever. And we've had a very hard work in pushing the buses and the cars out of city center, but it has succeeded now to a high extent. And this is Main Street, Sydney, as it was a few years ago, full of cars and noise and fumes. Now it is with a light rail and pedestrian bicycles. Of course, they also in Sydney are promoting bicycling as best they can as part of their policy. We will make Sydney a green city. So they have very much the greening of the city, the sustainability as a major issue in their city planning. So we have pushed the cars out of city center. We have pushed the buses away. We have introduced, we're taking car parking away to make room for city bicycle lanes. And what happens when you do all this? You bloody well become honorary citizen of the city and are given the keys to the city. That's how funny the world is. Then they heard about our work in New York, and they came rushing over to Copenhagen. This is the chief planner and the chief transport planner, two nice ladies. They grabbed some bicycles, they drove all over, and after 2 days they left the bicycles. We couldn't have them at night, but we got them back in the airport, and they said, "We want a city like this one. When can you come?" And then we were quick. We said, "Oh, we'll come on Monday." And then we went to New York, and we were part of the big plan of Michael Bloomberg. He said, "I would not like, today Manhattan has 1 million commuter cars coming over the bridges every day. That's nonsense. We have the metro, we have the sidewalks, and we have a flat city, we have a compact city. It's the ideal city. We have wide streets. It's the ideal city for bicycling. So in New York now, we shall walk, we shall take the metro, and we shall bicycle." And they did a lot to introduce bicycling. And in this process, they, of course, went to Copenhagen to see how to do it. Here the transport commissioner from New York is lying on her knees and being instructed about how to make safe bicycle lanes. And in this process, they started to say, "We haven't really got any nice public spaces in New York. We have no benches, we have no sidewalk cafes. If people get tired in New York, we say go up to Central Park. It's 4 kilometers that way." And then they started to say, couldn't we have something like Champs-Élysées in New York? And then we raised the question, do you really need Broadway for traffic? And the traffic planner said, of course we need Broadway, it's very important. Then the mayor said, go and check it out, model it. And then they come out 1 year later. Takes a lot of time to model traffic. They come out a year later and say, we don't need Broadway. Actually, the traffic in New York will run more smoothly if we don't have Broadway. So we were able to close Broadway in all the important places like Times Square, Herald Square, Union Square, Madison Square. And this is the situation before. On Times Square, which was not a square, but a traffic congestion. And then immediately it was taken over. The mayor said when this was done, it's relax, friends, it's only an experiment. And all the taxi drivers said it will never work in the Big Apple where we are awake 24 hours a day. A half year later, the mayor came out and said, an experiment? Absolutely no more, because it's the biggest success in modern American planning for 50 years. Also, the mayor, of course, put in all these bicycle lanes. And again, what happens when you do all these bad things to traffic and parking and good things for bicycling? You get a special award from the commissioner for all the things you've done for the city. And then I told about all these things in a conference in Montreal. And then this man came galloping up to me and said, I'm Deputy Mayor of Moscow. Can you come and humanize Moscow? We are in a hurry. When can you come? Monday. We can come on Monday. So in 2012, we went to Moscow, and I've never been there before, and I was completely shocked because that city was completely taken over by motor cars. And we had the joke that freedom from communism is the right to park everywhere. And also they were parking on the parks and on the sidewalks and on the monuments, on the stairs. They were parking everywhere. This is a nice little residential street in Moscow. And this is Main Street, Moscow, where, of course, they had not enough parking. So they also parked on the sidewalk of Main Street, Moscow, and left 1 meter for 14 million Moscovites to enjoy their Main Street. Then they're very efficient over there. So they started to say, how many books have you written? We'll translate them all. Then in 3 months, they translated 3 of them. City of Moscow is a publisher, and they handed them out to all their planning staff, whatever, and then they commissioned me and my team to come up with a plan to humanize Moscow very fast, which we did. In the meantime, while we were working on this, I was invited up to the Lord Mayor of Moscow who's a very big figure in Russia, and he said, "What are you going to write in your report?" And they're very sensitive to criticism, because then somebody further up could hear about criticism, not so good. So he said, what are you going to write? Yeah, this idea of parking on the sidewalk of Main Street, Moscow, and especially parking on the sidewalks and all over, that is not a very good idea. Then I came back 2 months later, and there were no parking on the sidewalks, because they have very efficient democracy over there. And then if the Russians should forget about the new rules, mayor had some little cars which went around and lifted your car up on the car and took it directly. The rumor has it went to Siberia. But anyway, everybody was worried if they would ever see their car again. So it was very efficient. But then started a process where Moscow, in just 5-6 years, was completely transformed. They had no rules for parking. They had now rules for parking. They actually threw out a lot of parking and also limited the number of lanes in many streets to have more room for people. They put in bicycle lanes. And this is Main Street, Moscow. Just 2 years later, it was the gray street had become green. Instead of cars, you had benches. And instead of advertisements in the air, you now could see all the way to Kremlin. This is a little side street, which was not a very good place for people before, but now it's a very much better place for people. This is the Pushkin Square, where over the years a number of objects have drifted in. Then now it has been cleaned up, and you can see there's actually a metro station. You have street trees, you have cafe, you have granite, you have a very nice urban space instead of a junkyard. All the canals and rivers in Moscow, all the edges, all the waterfronts were used for traffic and for parking. And we talked a little bit about that. What do they do in London? What do they do in Hudson River in New York? What do they do in Paris? What do they do in Rome? And what do they do in Moscow? You use all these waterfronts. Why don't you give it to the people and for recreation? And this was the beginning of a great process where they're full speed of winning back the waterfronts for the people. I could go on. It has been a marvelous change. And of course, I thought it was all done for the betterment of man. But then I realized that they were having World Championship in soccer, in football, in 2018. And when they had such a hurry on, it was that they needed to clean up the city before all the guests arrived. But it became a better city. And when I was there last time in 2017 or 18, they approached me and said, "Oh, Jan, we've got a new problem now, and it's your fault. We have the Moscow baby boom, because all the benches you put up and the swings you have on the squares, and people really love it. And we have these beautiful Moscow nights in the summer. We have baby boom. It's your fault. I'm very proud if I can create baby boom in Moscow." And what happens if you do all these awful things to the motorists in Moscow? You become hero of the Soviet, of the Russian something. I don't know. I cannot read it, but they were very serious about this. Fantastic. Now we come to Copenhagen. Copenhagen is it's a good boy in the class, because they started very, very early. And they started to throw the cars out of Main Street, Copenhagen, already in 1962. But the inspiration came from Germany, because and the rumor has it that the inspiration was from Kiel, and other German cities didn't invite the cars back after the war in the rebuilding. They started to have pedestrian zones, whatever. Copenhagen picked it up rather quickly, 62, and that is 60 years ago. That was very early on. They did a very great change in the city fabric. And I remember as a young architect, I heard all the discussions. It will never work in Denmark. We are Danes, we are not Italians, we are not used to walk, we cannot use public space, and furthermore, it's too cold in Scandinavia. It can never work. Then still they took the cars out. Next year we started to be Italians, and we have become more and more Italians for every year. And the whole city has been transformed, and they actually have done all this in small steps. When one thing was successful, they suggested the next and the next and the next, and they've gone that for 60 years now. This is a square as it used to be in the 50s. All the squares are now for people. This is the waterfront where all the waterfronts were used for car parking, because it's very important for the cars when they worked hard that they could have a nice view when they rest. But all these waterfronts have now been reclaimed for people, and gradually we've seen people taking over the spaces of the city. There is one important reason for all these things happening in Copenhagen, because we have this saying, what you count, you care for. And you know that all cities in the world have a transport department who count all the cars every year and make perfect statistics about the traffic now and the traffic 20 years from now. And they say to the mayor, we need some more lanes here and a freeway here, whatever. They have the documentation, and that means that the cars are very visible in city planning. But no city I know have a department for pedestrians and public life. And no city I know have perfect statistics about the life in the city. That was how it was early on. Now many cities have that. But Copenhagen was the first city in the world to have a complete data about the life in the city, documented and published. And this have had a very great influence on the policy of Copenhagen. We did all this as research in the university and studying how people use cities. We went out in our own city and used Copenhagen as a laboratory and published it. And after a very short time, the politicians and the mayor and the city council came running over to university and say, what shall we do next and how did this work? So we started to work together, and after a while they started to finance our research, which was very kind of them, because they could realize that it was important to have the human side of the picture as well documented as the automobile side of the picture. That was what happened in Copenhagen. What you count, you care for. We have counted now since the 60s, and now it's taken over by the city, who has a department for pedestrians and public life. What has happened in the city is also interesting. That is that in 62 we had one street. Now we have all the red areas which are treated and made welcoming people, and we've seen life growing and growing and growing. The more space you give to life, the better we've seen the life developing. Also, I can see now, looking back, that there's been a number of stages. The first stage was just to make room for people to walk. So that was to push out the cars and make Fußgängerstraße. But then the next phase from 1980, 2000 was, then we got tired of walking and we wanted to sit down. That was the time when the cappuccino culture spread, when we had the tourism coming, and tourists cannot walk all the time, they need to sit. And also Copenhagen, Danes started to be traveling and came back from the Spain and Italy and say, hey, we need some cafe and some nice surrounding here, and they got it. And also we could see that culture of the city started to be increasingly played out in the public spaces with festivals and all kinds of parades and processions and demonstrations. So it was really starting to become a forum for cultural exchange in the population. We are now in phase 3, where more and more emphasis is put on being active, on roller skating, or on skateboarding, or bicycling, or swimming in the harbor. And now we are into phase 4, which I promised to show to the mayor, that now they actually don't use money to make people happy. They use the money to adapt to the climate. And that means that we've had a number of really heavy rainfalls and great disasters in all the basement. There were water and whatever. So now they have a number of districts in the city which are called climate districts, where they do everything to keep the water in the district, but they made the whole district into a big sponge, so that when it rains heavily, it sucks up the water and keeps it in the neighborhood. The squares in the neighborhood would be nice squares, green squares, but when it's raining hard, it will be a wetland or lake. So they put vegetation on the rooftops, and they put vegetation in the yards and the streets, so that it's as green as possible and as less asphalt as possible, so it really can suck up the water when the water is there. And to me, that's very genius, because you use the same money 2 times. You make climate adaptation, and the whole district is much better for recreation and having a good life. Then we are into the 5th phase now, that is Osama bin Laden architecture, to make various protections against terror. This is the parliament, which has got this little discreet fortress around it. But what is very important in Copenhagen is that they have had for a long time this vision: we will be the best city in the world for people. And they made these strategies where they say, this is the goal, and this is a strategy. 5 years from now, we shall be there, and then we shall be there, we shall be there. So having vision and having strategies is a very good idea if you want a particular direction. In Copenhagen, it's very much that it's not about making the city center very nice, but making the whole city very nice. All the streets in Copenhagen are now changed. So instead of having 5, 6 lanes, they have now only 2 lanes, one this way, one the other way. And they have a median, they have trees, they have bicycle lanes. And this lower street is much more beautiful. It's safer for all types of traffic. And it can take the same number of cars as the upper street could, because the traffic engineers are more smart now than they were 40 years ago, 30 years ago. Another item of this policy in Copenhagen is the policy of continuous bicycle lanes. Nowhere in the United Nations human rights is there a sentence saying whenever you come with a Mercedes to a corner, you shall have the right to go out and go to the right and left. They've changed this to say that the Mercedes-Benz can wait in all the important streets. They take the sidewalks along, take the bicycle lanes, and let the cars wait until there is time for them to go out. They can go on the other end of the street. And this, of course, is to show the priority of walking and bicycling. But also, my daughter told me, "Oh, Papa, it's wonderful how they made now my area," because little Laura, my grandchild, 7 years old, she can now walk all the way from her door to the door of the school without crossing any streets anymore. That is very important when you're 7. Also in Copenhagen, they've done a lot for bicycling. They have made a complete citywide system of bicycle lanes, and they are good bicycle lanes with curb to the traffic and curb to the pedestrians. This is developed into a transportation system. Every 3rd family in Copenhagen have a cargo bike to transport the kids. And the crucial thing in a bicycle system is the crossings, and they have worked hard to make the crossings safe in various ways. And they're now so safe that when my grandchildren are 12 years old, they're allowed to go everywhere in the city on their bikes. Also, to have a good bicycle system, it should be integrated with the public transportation. In the Copenhagen, you can take the bicycles for free in the trains. That's very popular. They also have this policy that it should always be faster to take your bike than to take your car. So they made a number of bridges and shortcuts in the city, and they are very popular. And of course, they have this policy, we will be the best city in the world for bicycling, and 5 years from now, we shall be there. 10 years, we shall be there. If we look at this, you can see that an impressive culture of using bicycle has evolved because they put in the infrastructure. It takes a while to evolve this bicycle culture, but now 49% of everybody going to the city is arriving on bicycling because Copenhagen is very flat, of course. 10 years ago, it was 38%. So really, there was room for this improvement. And what we've learned in Copenhagen is that you get what you invite for. If you make more streets and more lanes and more parking spaces, you invite for more driving and you get more traffic. In Copenhagen, they have done everything they could to invite people to walk more, to use the public spaces more, and to have more bicycling. And we have documentation that these areas have increased because they've been invited specifically. What happens in a city when you do all these dramatic things to change the behavior of the citizens? Yeah, firstly, the Minister of Culture read really good books, but more important, she makes a new architectural policy, put people first in architecture, which is very nice. And what happens when you do all these things? You have more and more delegations from all over the world. We have 400 delegations of mayors and city planners to come every year to see how Copenhagen is doing. And I will extend an invitation to the Marburg mayor and the city planners from here, city councillors. You're welcome to come, and we shall make sure that you learn to bike in just 2 days, and we'll have a great time. That's fine. And what happens if you do all these bad things to a city? Your first assistant is becoming the city architect, so now the future is secure. And what happens if you do this? Yeah. When Copenhagen was 850 years, they had a big festival, and then they named 10 persons who in these 800 years had formed the city, and for God's sake, they say that Copenhagen today, that's the work of me, because we in the School of Architecture were really pioneers in this, making people visible. And then it's of course fantastic in your lifetime to go around in the city and see your face on the bus stops and the metro doors, even while you're not dead yet. That is fantastic. So, and what happens? Copenhagen becomes time and again the most livable city in these lists they put out in various magazines about most livable cities in the world. And if you look at these cities, you will find two things. There's never a city in England or UK in this list, though all the lists are made in England. And you can see that there are many cities from Australia and New Zealand and from Scandinavia. And also, of course, Munich is frequently there, Zurich is there, and big cities like Tokyo is also, Vienna is there. So you can see that, but all these cities have done specifically much to make them people-friendly. So, in the end, I'll say to you all, good luck in your ongoing work for making Marburg a livable, a sustainable, and a healthy city, which is good for all generations. And if you would like to know how to do it, you can just read my books in Germany. They are out now, finally. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jan Gehl, for your well, impressive overview of your work and the insight in your philosophy behind it. I think on several issues we are on quite a good way here in Marburg. We try to care better for the people in the city, and we try to become as much as possible with our hilly topography we've been looking at yesterday, to be welcoming to traffic of all kind. As a starter for our discussion, I'm just wondering, do you have like one of your visions for Marburg, at least concerning the part you've already seen?
No. No, I'm not a strong believer in being here for 2 days and then come up with the solution from them. You've been here for a long time and you worked hard. You're working on it, but I showed you these examples from other cities which could inspire for this or the other. I would not say where to start and what to do here, but I have something which is interesting. That is, I've never been invited to a city who was not already online with the kind of thinking. They would not be so stupid to invite me if they were not on the line of making a livable city and wanted some further inspiration. So the very fact that you have dared to invite me is a very good sign that you're well on your way.
Thank you. So I'm just opening the discussion to all of you. I have to stand up because actually I otherwise can't see you. Is there any question to Jan Gehl or any other of us on the podium about what we just heard or your impression? The podium is open.
No, he's my doctor. He can go first.
Just a second, you were late, if I might say so. You're not into the techniques. We have the microphones here that are handed over to everybody who wants to say something so that the people can hear it in the live stream.
Thank you very much for your wonderful talk and inspirations. My question is, if we take all the cars out, where to put the cars and how you let the people come in? Especially for Marburg, we have a city of a lot of disabled people, of blind people. So they need to have any possibility to approach, to reach these fantastic places. Where did you put all the masses of cars? Where did you put them in the cities? You make special park houses? Is it underground? How to reach the places?
Yeah, I do think that in Copenhagen they've really had the strategy to reduce the number of car parking in the very center of the city. And we had this traffic engineer who said, if you remove parking slowly and don't tell about it, people will not notice. So he took 2% of the parking out every year for 20 years, which, and all the time the city become better. But you have absolutely a valid point that there are groups in the population who really need to be transported. And but that is also, in all the cities I've worked with, that is solved and they are allowed in and to the doctors, whatever. My whole philosophy is not against cars, it is pro-people. That means that we shall be sure that in our eagerness to find room for the cars and find streets for the cars, we shall not forget the other side of the coin, that there are people living here and there are people going to school and whatever, so that we should have equal observation to good life for the people and also looking after the traffic. I mentioned that we have been very asymmetric for many years, having a transport department very strong and no department or body in the city council who looked after the people. Now one city after the other is lifting the people side into the same position as the car side, so that they document how the life in the city is developing, where there are shortcomings, what can be done better. And that is really what we've done in all these cities I work with. We always start by documenting how the city is used today by people, and then you can start to discuss, is this satisfactory, or could we do more to have more life and invite people more to use the city here and there? In Moscow, we found that the city was almost completely dead because life has been killed by the automobiles. We could see that the only signs of life was just inside 200 meters of the metro stations. People come up from the metro and rushed over to their offices, but there were no walking around in the city anymore. So knowing about the life in the city and knowing about the traffic in the city is, to me, equally important for making a good, balanced city policy. And it has to be balanced, and it's not against cars, but it's certainly for this period, we have to look more after the people because they've been overlooked for quite a while.
There was a second.
Here's the second one. Hello. I'm just working in the opposite side of this picturesque town we have. I'm working at the Richtsberg, which is a modern part of the town. And I'd like to know whether you have any ideas to bring in a small part. There are just 9,000 people living there. Compared to the big cities, you had the examples for it's quite small. But I was quite fascinated about this idea of the detailed facades. How can we change them? How can we make it more attractive in very small places for the people? We do a lot to make places more attractive. We do a lot for healthy city, for example. But I think in the small neighborhoods, maybe you have some examples we could learn from?
I'm aware that I showed you some of the big elephants I've shot in my life. The big five. Dong, 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 dong. But I have worked also in cities of all sizes and villages as small as 200 people. And I would and other people would say that what is good in America is not good in Japan. And my take is that it's Homo sapiens in all these places, and many of the things is very basic for the walking animal, and that's the same. So generally, the methods we have used can be used in all levels of size, as long as there are Homo sapiens around. And I will not know how to address this particular area, but there are many examples, we talked about it this morning, of how to improve Plattenbau areas from the 60s and how to improve districts made in these intervening years with too much emphasis on cars. There are so many examples around the world for working with all sizes up to many millions of people and down to 200 people.
I've seen two people now. That's the lady in the second row and the guy in the first row. And
I have two questions. The first one is linked to infrastructure for bicycles. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you organize that you don't have just nice and safe bicycle lanes, but for example, if I go with my bicycle, high-level e-bike to the train station, I don't know where I can put it in a safe way, so I don't do it, and I have to think about, I will ask somebody to bring me by car. So which solutions did you find? And the second question is linked to the question that a sustainable city, for me, is not just a question of cars out and people in, but, for example, new solutions for energy. Do you think is this included into your plans?
Let's take the bicycle thing first. Again, I would say that every problem in city planning is solved somewhere. And I've never heard of a problem where you could not remember that is actually what they've done there. When you talk about bicycle storage, the Dutch are very clever in this area. They have at the stations, they have looked after stations where you could, also in Freiburg, I've seen some, the stations, places where you could put your bicycle and they will repair it over while you're away, whatever. So there are a number of very good solutions to these questions. The question of a hilly city is more complicated. You mentioned the e-bike. I worked with Hobart in Tasmania in Australia, and they have a very hilly city, but we found out that 65% of the population were living on the flat part of the city, and that was also where the university were and where this hospital were. So we made a bicycle plan for the flat area and said that the rich people in the mountains, they will have to go in other ways, but we will make sure that the students could get to the university and the nurses, whatever, people could get to the... So the flat part we looked after, but then we said we can't really solve the hilly parts. In Oslo, in Trondheim, Norway, they have escalators for bicycles in the hills. So that's a possibility to think about. So there could be solutions here and there on most of the problems. The other problem you mentioned was
sustainability.
Energy. Yeah, of course, we are forced to rethink our mobility strategies and use other types of energy. And of course, I meet again and again the idea that in a short little while we'll have all our cars will be electrical and we can have as many cars as we ever had. But now they're electrical, no problem. Also, they're without a driver, even less problem. So all the problems will be solved. But we will have to rethink our mobility because it's such a waste of resources that everybody have a ton of steel and 4 rubber wheels to have his mobility solved. And they are doing nothing for 95% of their entire life. They're just taking up city space. So there's not room for cars for everybody to have cars in the dense areas. And we will have to have much more shared transportation. We'll have other modes of motoring, that means electricity. And we will have to reduce car driving and do much more to organize our housing, our workplaces, so that we can serve them as pearls on a line of public transportation instead of this going in all directions in all times. We will have to change the philosophy about mobility. And of course, one thing which to some extent could be used is that we work more at home and have less need for mobility on some days, but that will only be for the privileged people who can work at home and only for some part of the life of the day, of the week. So it can take some of the pressure off, but we will basically have in 10, 15 years' time to come up with new strategies of mobility in our cities, because what we are doing now is senseless.
First of all, before I ask, thank you wel, Herr Gehl, for making the trip to my favorite place on earth. And vielen Dank an Frau Bonk für die Einladung. I wouldn't know about it without you. My question is, after I sort of just soaked up your wisdom like a cheerful little sponge, so I would be fascinated to know what your opinion of Hundertwasser is.
That's a trap. That is a trap.
I swear I didn't mean it.
I know that. Yeah, I really like architects with a crooked mind and with a great fantasy, whatever. And I think that Hundertwasser is very good because there's only one of him. if all of them were like him, it would be completely impossible to live in the cities. But it's very nice to have one like him here and a few places. And then there's another crazy architect here and here and here, and that makes our life more rich. So I think he's very good as long as there are not too many of him.
So clinical lunatics one at a time.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, are we having any questions from online? Because I don't see any yet. Richard? Oh, okay. So, and we have another person wanting to ask a question, which I unfortunately don't see, but you will be provided with a microphone in a minute, I'm sure.
I do have the microphone, thank you. My question is, over the years and the different, you worked like a long time in different cultures, different countries, and with different people and politicians. What are the common rocks in the way to a sustainable city or to a green city? Like, what are the common problems?
Yeah, I don't really see the problems. That means that I worked in 50 years in these areas, and I found a great understanding of something like that all of us can recognize ourselves as human beings in these settings, and we can see that some of the things we have done is not too smart. And actually there's been great support, and that's also why these politicians here and there take up these ideas and make them citywide, because they have the voters behind them. In Sydney, the mayor has been re-voted 4 times with more and more votes on an increasingly green and people-friendly agenda for the city. So I really have found that after what I think are these crazy years of early modernism, where everything should be changed and we should be living in a completely different way, and these crazy years of the introduction of the automobiles, where we have this love affair with the automobile, until we started to realize that it may be a love affair, but it would have to come to its senses, and we will have to sort it out. So I really have felt that the world has been progressing, and that the more we have studied, the more research and the more knowledge and examples we've had, the more tailwind for this humanistic city planning I have seen. So, and of course there's been all these obstacles of saying this can never happen in my town and all this, but then, like in New York, they said all of them, we can never do these European silly things here. And then when they did it, it was the greatest success. So I've seen so many cases that we are all Homo sapiens, and we all have the same basic history of biological history and basic visions of good life, whatever. And we have to stick to our gut feelings about what is a good city. And it's very, to me, it's very, very logical. It's all in here. It's all about who we are and what kind of... maybe I could tell a little story. The mayor of Bogota is called Enrique Peñalosa, and he's a great guy, done a lot of good things in Bogota. And he was saying it's a paradox that Homo sapiens has taken so fantastic interest in good habitat for mountain gorillas and for whales and for the love life of elephants, and that we know so little about good urban habitat for Homo sapiens. We have studied in a number of areas, but we've not studied enough about our own habitat. I think that's very correct. And when we start to study our own habitat, it makes sense for nearly all of us.
Thank you.
There's a guy just there behind the screen.
Oh.
Is bobbing up and down.
Thanks very much. Yeah.
Ja, mein Englisch ist nicht so gut. Also, Herr Gehl, ich stimme mit vielen Ihrer Ideen überein und trotzdem habe ich eine sehr kritische Frage. Wenn Sie sagen, Städte für Menschen, die Menschen sind in verschiedenen Gruppen. Für welche Gruppen der Menschen arbeiten Sie? Sie haben zum Beispiel Melbourne genannt und da haben vor der Transformation
So in
kaum
Melbourne,
Menschen
for example,
gewohnt
there
und dann
didn't
sind
live
andere
many people before the
Orte, da
transformation,
leben
but there are
Menschen.
other
Und da
areas
will
where
ich das
people
Beispiel
lived.
Marburg halt
And
anbringen.
for example,
Sie
I have
waren, ich habe
the
gesehen,
example
gestern
of
waren Sie auf
Marburg
dem
right now.
Kirchhof in der
You saw
Oberstadt.
that you were at Kirchhof in the upper
Dort haben
city.
früher auch Autos der
There
Anwohner geparkt
were
und
a
die
lot
hat man
of
weggenommen und
cars
hat
in upper
gesagt,
times. They
wir
were
wollen
taken
das
away.
für
So they
Märkte,
said,
für
we want to have it for the
Konzerte,
market,
zur
concerts.
Aufenthaltsqualität.
We want to have it
Und das ist dann
for
immer mehr
leisure
geworden
time.
und
It
auch in
became
der
more and more
autofreien eigentlich
to be a
Beeinflussungsstraße
car-free
ist immer mehr
zone. And
Außenbestuhlung.
then in
Und so hat man
another
heute von
zone,
morgens
there
9
were
bis
put
zum
up
nächsten
a lot
Morgen um
more
5 hat man vorne und
tables,
hinten Lärm.
etc.
Da ist
But for the
Party,
people living there, there's
Freitag,
party going
Samstag,
on. You
Sonntag
have a lot of
auf dem
noises
Kirchhof.
all the
Das geht
time.
morgens manchmal bis 5
It's
im Sommer.
until 5
Da wird
a.m. in the
natürlich
summertime
vor meine
sometimes.
Tür gepinkelt,
So in
wird auch
front of my
manchmal
door,
gekotzt und
they're
dann wird auch
gonna
gekackt.
pee there
Und
or
es
vomit in
gibt
front of
etwa
my door.
3000 Menschen, dafür gibt es noch 25
So
Parkplätze für die
there live
Anwohner,
actually
ganz,
3,000
ganz wenig
people,
kleine Kinder
but
und
there are
ganz,
only
ganz
25
wenig alte
parking
Leute. Ich halte mich noch
spaces.
so mit letzter Kraft.
So I'm still one of
Und
the older ones.
das
The other
reicht
ones
ja so ein
moved away
bisschen, wir
already.
machen weniger Autos, da kommen aber dann
So
ganz viele
if you
Leute
put
mit einem
less
besseren
cars
Nahverkehr und
there,
mit einer besseren
but
Fahrradinfrastruktur Tag
actually
und Nacht in die Stadt.
would
Aber
put
die Menschen, die da
people
wohnen,
there
haben
with
ganz viel
more
Lärm und haben ganz viele
bikes and
Beeinträchtigungen.
people, pedestrians, they actually
Ist
do what I
Ihnen das
just explained.
bewusst oder haben Sie
Are
eine
you
Methode,
conscious
wie
about
man
that?
dagegen steuern kann?
That you're not working for all the groups,
Okay,
and do you
the
actually have a
I
method?
try to sum it up a little. He agrees with a lot of your points, but he has a critical question, and he refers to you being at the Lutheran courtyard yesterday, where we had the first view of the inner city, and he says this used to be a parking lot for the people living there, and the cars have been removed and taken away to make space for cultural events and for people leisuring there, which of course changes the life of the people living in the city. And actually, he says the age structure of the people in the city is such that there are hardly any families with kids and hardly any elderly people. He just manages, he said, and and you have the problem of people being on the street and sitting in the cafes, and so there's noise at this side of the street. You have noise at the other side because there are people partying on the yard probably, and so with that, other not very nice side effects come with it, and he shall I translate word by word? So by people defecating in front of his front door, actually. That's a question. He says, do you have any solution for what is happening there? How did you do this in the city where you're working with? And he also referred to he asked for which people are you doing this? Because in Melbourne, he said there were hardly any inhabitants before the transformation began. So what is your target group?
Yeah, Melbourne first, they have actually moved a lot of people into the city center. They have allowed to build 6 extra stories on the office buildings so that you could always be allowed to build more if you have. They've done a lot of things, also tax reduction if you move to the city center. They've done everything to move people back. And they've had lots of supermarkets coming back to the city center. It's a long story, but it's very interesting. But this other one, which is important, that is that cities are, when people are close together, there are always conflicts. There are all types of conflicts. But the whole story of people living in cities is a story of conflicts and solving conflicts. And we have to go in and regulate the conflicts. We know it precisely about automobiles. If there are too many accidents in a corner, we change the layout of the corner. If there are too fast traffic here, we slow it down. We make what's called shared streets or whatever. We have a number of ways to control the traffic if there are problems. So traffic is an area where we constantly regulate what is happening, to regulate the behavior of the people. And also in cities, in city life, you have to be ready to regulate if there are too many unwanted accidents. Many cities we've had too many street entertainment, so that you heard these playing the Condor Passas 12 hours a day at the same corner. That of course is not acceptable, and you have to say you can play it here, here, and only after 6. Things like that. You have many examples of noisy cafes, which have been called either you move the cafe or you close the outdoor serving at 10 o'clock or something. All this we see, that is part of city life. Of course, city life cannot be without conflicts. If you don't like conflicts, go to the suburbs. You can have a very quiet time there with your car. But in the city, also we should be a little bit tolerant, but also we should put borders. And sometimes things go too far. Definitely. And then we have to regulate. I've been part of regulating behavior many cities, many times, because too much of the good thing is not too good.
I've seen a few other. Now we have the online questions. I wanted to include the podium a bit into this discussion. Frau Klug, I was wondering with the second last thing that Jan Gehl said about the people including, I mean that the city planners have to include this in their everyday work, basically. You as the one who's responsible for this in our city, how much time would you have to do this, or is it on your agenda already, and how? I mean, I think it might be pretty difficult to implement this every day, even if you would like to do it. How, could you probably give a little insight in your experience with that?
Okay, kann ich in Deutsch sprechen?
Yeah, oh, then I have to translate the answer, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Gut, natürlich ist uns die BewohnerInnen in Marburg sehr wichtig und natürlich auch deren Verhalten und was die BewohnerInnen benötigen. Und wir versuchen das natürlich bestmöglich auch in unsere Planung zu integrieren und machen deswegen auch frühzeitige BürgerInnenbeteiligung, um das in Erfahrung zu bringen und dann
already integrate the people into our planning and in order to react as fast as possible.
She tries to do with participation of citizens and participation processes to include the people in the planning of the urban planning office, actually.
And I could sentence, please.
Okay. Of course.
As far as I understand it, Frau Klug's idea of developing the city is making it livable city, a healthy city, a sustainable city, and a city for the old, because that's why she got the job.
Good luck, and that sounds great.
Thanks.
We have a question from our participants who are with us online. The first one goes to you, Thomas Spies. They're asking for your vision for our city. Will we get real bike lanes? Will there be any new agoras, for example, in front of the Erwin Piscator house, which is, you know, the upper part, not the KFZ, but it belongs to the whole building of EPH. That is the abbreviation EPH here in the city, and it's the former city hall.
Okay, for the last years, we have been developing bicycle lanes on the streets we have. And in the only area where we actually have 2 lanes in the same, or one of the very few areas where we have 2 lanes in the same direction, we took one away from the cars and gave it to the bicycles. However, we have very few areas where we have more than 2 lanes one for each direction. So it makes it a little difficult to taking away a lane from the car unless you have an idea what to happen with the cars, especially in a small, in those small valleys where you have no alternative to move. At the moment, we're preparing with Move 35. Mobility strategy. We're developing with mobility strategy for the whole town, and we have collected 3,800 ideas or answered questionnaires from people in Marburg and around. Because the special problem for a town like Marburg is that we have to serve. We have a responsibility for the area around, so we have to be reachable for a rural area, which is kind of different than being just a city within its own borders. So we're expecting that the Move 35 concept, which has the goals of making more sustainable, changing mobility to the away from cars. We're looking forward to the suggestions they make because they're the ones who are actually calculating what will happen for different changes we do in the city as the city is small. The idea is behind it is, I think we have done that. Actually, the thing people mostly, the criticism on traffic politics I heard the most times is that I'm supposed to be loving bicycles and hating cars, which is not true. I think we have to. The town is too small to not look very carefully how you share the very reduced amount of space we have here that is used for traffic. So yes, there where we can take away a lane from the cars and hand it over to the bicycles, we do it. And we will have to find out what actually will happen with the traffic if you take away lanes in streets which only have 2 lanes. What will happen then? We're just working on some qualified prognosis on that to make decisions afterward. There was a second part of the question, but she disappeared.
Nope. That's
okay. The antique agora is the marketplace where you have where you buy things, where things are sold, where you have gastronomy, where you have public living, where you have political discussion, where you have art and culture. I think the equivalent for our town is not one single public space. I think the equivalent for a town like Marburg, and what makes Marburg so lively, is that the center of town is the agora. The liveliness of the city and of the streets in the center you've seen is made up because the market is in the ground floor of the buildings. It's made up because the gastronomy is in the ground floor of the buildings and they use the street area. It's because we bring more and more culture into the center of town to make it a lively place in the evening beyond gastronomy. It's that we introduce rooms for public discussion or for public information into the center area of town to make it a more lively place to other times than when people go shopping. So I don't think there would be much sense in planning this single spot up there as an agora. It apparently needs. Apparently, a lot of people want some improvement on the character of the space when it is not needed for climate demonstration and for the international fest on 3rd of October and things like that. So you have to find a solution to get it maybe a little more usable in times where it is not needed as a big open space, because that was the idea to construct, Jürgen, du kannst das besser sagen als ich, to give a place where you can have a wide open space in the center of town. But apparently it's 90% of the time it is not needed as a wide public space. So we're working on solutions to have removable things on there that may change. And actually, we just applied on last Friday. City Parliament decided to apply for money from someone else to pay for redecorating it or giving it a chance to be a little more lively on regular days. So we'll work on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I see 2, 3. This is behind the screen. I'm awfully sorry. Who is? Okay. I see 3 people in the auditorium already, and we have a couple of also, well, kind of burning questions on the internet. And I would like to, let's say, try that we answer another 5, because we are actually already over the time we planned, which was due to the interesting lecture of Jan, of course. But let's keep it with the 3 people from the auditorium and another 2, 3 questions from online, and then we would probably close the evening. There was a word back there I've seen first.
Hello, Mr. Gehl. I wondered, what value do you give the reconstruction of older city or building structure, like in Frankfurt Center, the so-called Hühnermarkt? Is it part of your strategy whenever it's possible?
I did not understand the question. I don't know Frankfurt, by the way.
Frankfurt City, in the center, was a reconstruction of older city part, the so-called Hühnermarkt. It's a medieval city structure, small paths and small buildings in the style of the medieval ages. And
okay.
Was habe ich gesagt? Ja, was habe ich gesagt?
Okay.
So, so the goal was to achieve a more picturesque and livable city feeling by reconstruction older city parts that maybe vanished in World War II. Is it a strategy of your plan?
I've not been involved in projects like that, but I know that in quite a few cities where they've had a great loss of the history of the city, they have done great efforts to rebuild part of the city. The most famous example is the old town of Warsaw, where they have painstakingly rebuilt a district as it looked like before it was destroyed, because they lost so much. I also know that in Dresden and other places like that, they have tried to save what they can of the history. I think that is valid, but sometimes it can be, of course, kitsch and Disneyland, this kind of mimicking another time. But there is one interesting thing about the old fabric, that it was, as I mentioned, it was generally much more people-friendly than the new fabric. And as far as I know about Frankfurt, what they rebuilt is not so nice as it used to be in the old days, as far as I know. But that is typical, and that's a bad luck of Germany, that it rebuilt its city in the worst period of city planning we have encountered. That is the 50s and 60s and 70s. So a lot of the fabric which came up after the war is actually not very charming or people-friendly, unfortunately. I think that today we know more and can do better. And there are good examples of new towns, also in Germany, also around the world, of contemporary, modern, but in human scale and nice, people-friendly Siedlungen and districts, without copying.
There was a lady, like in the middle, some. Yeah, exactly. You.
Hello, I wanted to ask because you said something about, I'm here, hi, about slowing down traffic. Because you didn't really talk about speed limits during your presentation, so I wanted to ask what role do speed limits play in your restructuring of cities?
I have made it a principle not to try to be a traffic engineer. I don't know too much about traffic. I have good people who know about it. And I know that what I mentioned was that when we have problems in the city, if we have a lot of traffic accidents, we go in and regulate somehow. If we have many criminal events in this district, we go in and try to find out to put more lights and more policemen. We regulate. If we have much noise in this area, we try to calm down the cafes. And so we regulate. And I think that traffic is the best example of an area where we are happily going to regulate if we find behavior which is not safe or good for the city. So I use that as an example, but I don't know about details. But I think that some of you drive very fast on the Autobahn.
The gentleman in the first row.
We have heard that Marburg is a very difficult city, many problems and many things doesn't go. I think that's not the only true. I think Marburg is a city of the great fear. The fear because the voters, the fear because to make a decision, a fear to decide what is better life for car drivers or for students or for kids. For example, I'm a headmaster in a school with more than 5,000 students around in 5 schools, and there is a road through the schools. And it's not possible to close these schools because 100 or 300 car drivers cross this road. What do you say, the headmaster, to say against this fear to decide for a sustainable and a livable city?
I think I'll say nothing because I think that we are now deep into detail, and I will right away put the questions to the locals who know the situation better than I do. But I've worked all my life with principles and with keyword lists of what to do, whatever. Then people will have to use them as best they see fit in their situation. To me, the principles are very clear. And they can be read in these books, which are not going into detail with Marburg, but going into the principles, the ideology of planning, and the goals we have in planning.
There's 2 fears about, it's true, in some sense, what Herr Denfert says. There's 2 things that we actually have to be cautious about. One is, how will people who usually pass this area to move somewhere else, what other ways will they take, and what will happen during times when there is no school and people pass through or cannot pass through anymore to those living around? And how much more traffic will they get? Now, that's a question we hopefully will be able to answer soon, because we're just working on counting and making models of how traffic will change under which circumstances. So we actually do not have to be afraid of someone. We will just know it will happen this way or that way. The second problem is, the question could be solved very easily. You could just close the street 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours on the lunchtime, so you at least wouldn't have the major use of the street, the parents bringing children driving through the street anymore. However, this is a very difficult question, because will the children then go by bus or bike, or will they still be brought by car stop on the street where they still can pass along, and make a traffic jam in which all the buses with all the children who have to be on time in school will be stopped somewhere. So this is the second question that actually has to be calculated and which has to be tested. And that's the plan, making a test what will actually happen if we close the street, and how will parents react in their urge to bring children to school by car. And I think the problem of bringing children to school by car cannot be solved by closing the street in front of the school, but instead by changing traffic strategy and the mobility strategy in the whole town, so that people will put their children into the bus or be not afraid to have 12-year-olds ride on a bike to school. And then we just wouldn't have that many cars there anymore, and the problem would be a lot easier to solve.
As promised, I want to refer to some last questions of the auditorium that joined us online. A big issue, as you already noticed, I guess, is the so-called Stadtautobahn, the so-called city highway, a federal street that leads straight through Marburg. And the person asked, we in Marburg have a very special attitude that it's a very special situation that the whole city is being crossed by a super regional highway. So even if making the whole city wonderful for the people, the line along the land will still be some kind of hell. How could we possibly deal with that, and the responsible authorities? Referring to that actually the authorities responsible for this street is from the state of Hesse and not from Marburg.
The first thing I would like to point out is that if we had this traffic problem today, we would never have routed the road through Marburg in this way. This is an old-fashioned way of doing things which is not done today. And so, but always with these questions I will ask, do you have earthquakes around here? Because we have this rather interesting example from San Francisco, where the major freeway serving the city of San Francisco was ruined by the earthquake in 1989. And everybody thought now San Francisco will die because the freeway has crumbled. And they panically tried to find out how to rebuild that freeway. And inside 3 months, they came back and say, we don't have to work on the freeway because San Francisco is having a good time. It's found other ways of service, and we don't need the freeway no more. Now they have trams, light rail going up and down, and people promenading where there was once a freeway. So we can hope for an earthquake, maybe. Then we can... Then we can reconsider, and we will know that we will never do that today again in the same way. It's old-fashioned to have these kind of problems in a habitated area.
One of the
so give time, you'll find another solution.
Oh, we're discussing it for a while already, I'd say.
Yeah.
For the next question I can see here concerning the Lahnberge, I would refer to the video we already have online from our student session, because Jan already mentioned something there, so I make a little advertisement for our own event, so to say, and would like to go to another question referring to what you said earlier about Plattenbauten that should be replaced by smaller houses. And the question is, what is more important, much needed cheap apartments or an open city, but for fewer people, or how could both be combined in a good way?
I think you will have to repeat the essence.
You were talking about Plattenbauten to bring them down and replace them with smaller units. And the question is, what actually a half social question, what is more important, to have a lot of cheap living space for more people, which is not beautiful? Or how could you combine both efforts to have enough space and also make it more livable?
I was referring to strategies which are used in a number of countries which have Plattenbau as you have. And a very frequent strategy is to take a few of the multi-story buildings, 4, 5, 6-story buildings away, to make room for lower housing, but actually building in such a way that you get more flats. In the end, you have more people living in the area, but you have a smaller human scale between the buildings and not so much unused grass. So it's not about reducing the number of people living there, but it's about having another scale and actually having more people living there so there can be more services, whatever.
And the last question, because always we had it the issue with Jan Gehl a couple of times about everybody loves trees. So as the concluding question, I would say we choose, what do you think is the best way to obtain the green, like botanical gardens, trees and flowers in town, against the building of too many big houses and streets and places with too much stories, like, for example, the train station place in Marburg? Actually, Jan hasn't had a long glimpse on it. We passed it yesterday. You saw it's just for the buses, and there's no traffic flowing through it as it used to be when I came to Marburg. So it has been actually reduced from the floating traffic. But the obtaining of green, I think, is a big issue, and the bringing in more green is a big issue in our city.
That is all over the world a big issue. And I mentioned that, of course, it has been found to be very beneficial for city districts to have much green and much vegetation to receive great number of rainfall, as we have more and more cases of. So, of course, one should not reduce the green in the city, but one should work to improve the number of trees and the areas for green. And it could certainly be coinciding with making, as I showed from Copenhagen, these areas which they don't remove a single house, they just make the area much greener and much more climate adaptable and much better for recreation also, without changing the number of people living there. So keep the green and improve the situation for the green. That's what they work on everywhere.
That's good advice, I think, for Marburg 800 and for our future activities for inventing Marburg to an even better place than it is today. I wish to thank you all for participating. I wish to thank everybody who joined us online. If you would like to recommend our event tonight, it will be online on the video portal of Marburg 800 for the next years, basically, so you can always refer to it or send the link to your friends. I would like to thank everybody on the podium, Frau Klug, Thomas Spies, Jan, and especially, of course, I would thank Jan Gehl for coming here, for joining us, for letting us take part in his, I think, pretty striking ideas from which we would like to implement many more in the future. Thank you very much, Jan.
If I could have the last word, I would say that I have been very impressed by Marburg. It was a great, pleasant surprise to see this well-preserved old city, and also to see all the greenery and the landscape around. And we had this fun saying that it's like the history of city planning. You have the old structure based on spaces for people, and you have the new structures based on objects with people inside them. And you have the whole thing, but I think that there are so many things going for this city, And I think you are very, very lucky that it has not been as destroyed as many sad German cities I've seen. So it was just a pleasure to come here. And I think it's a lovely city, actually.
Thank you very much.
Ende.
Wishing you a good way home, and I think there might be a book table outside, so actually I must admit I haven't seen it, but I got promised that there would be some books, so if you like to buy a book, Jan Gehl would be happy to sign it for you.